Anna has been a gardener at the U.S. Botanic Garden for 11 years. She's responsible for growing North American native plants and carnivorous plants and manages 2 native-themed gardens on the conservatory grounds. She loves finding and growing uncommon plants to expand our outdoor garden collections. We are very excited to have Anna here today answering your questions. Anna, can you tell us a little about the carnivorous plants you grow and care for?
Yeah, hi. Thanks, Elizabeth, and thanks everybody for joining us today for Scary, Beautiful Carnivorous Plants. When we were thinking about doing a presentation, that idea came up for a couple of reasons. The first is that while a lot of plants are going dormant this time of year, there's no question that a lot of our carnivorous plants are absolutely stunning right now. And the second thing is that if you're like me, a lot of people around town, we think of things that are either spooky or smelly or odd for this time of year. And carnivorous plants are definitely something that can fit into that. We've known for centuries people have been intrigued by these plants and collected them from the wild. And then it was about 150 years ago that Charles Darwin had a famous publication, of course, after studying some of the native carnivorous plants. So what I'd like to do is just go through and show you some of ours from our collection. And then if at any time you feel like popping a question into the chat, Elizabeth will relay that to me and I'll do the best that I can to answer it. So as Elizabeth said, that most of the plants that I grow are native to North America. And that's actually a really fun place to look at carnivorous plants because we have a very wide diversity of what we call our Sarracenia, our pitcher plants. The diversity of these is mostly focused in the southeastern United States in an area called the coastal plains. So you're looking at anywhere from Georgia, Alabama, Florida, up the Atlantic coast. Some of them actually go up as far as southern Canada, like the Sarracenia purpurea. What you'll notice about these is that they are all modified leaves that have a hollow opening. And what happens with these is that insects are attracted to them for both visual cues as well as scents that are emitted by the traps. And insects will then fall into the hollowed out leaf, become trapped, and then be digested by enzymes within this leaf. Some of the ones, like this purpurea, you can see that they don't really have a covering over the top. The lip is pretty much wide open, and those collect rainwater. Insect prey in those tend to drown. These are all very closely related. This one here, Sarracenia leucophylla, is my personal favorite. But here you have Sarracenia minor, which, if you can see on the camera here, has these white speckles. People call those windows. So you could imagine if an insect were to find its way into this pitcher, it would then be further confused by seeing light coming through those windows, and then would exhaust itself and still not be able to find its way out. Also related to these pitcher plants is one that occurs further south into Venezuela. You can see that these also have this tubular-shaped modified leaf with a very reduced foot on the top. This, like the purpurea, tends to drown its victims. Similar region geographically, but this is actually a bromeliad. You might think of bromeliads as being things that are often grown as ornamentals, or you might even find in your lunch as a pineapple. This one is the similar pitfall trap, grows in high elevations in Venezuela. Another group of carnivorous plants is something that are sundews. Sundews are actually cover a pretty wide geographic range, but they all tend to have these glandular long leaves. You can see a little bit, I'm not sure if it's going to pick up on the camera, and you might see a glistening. It's actually not dew from the sky, but a substance that is emitted from glands on the leaf surface. If you were to be able to be with me right now and touch this, you would feel that it's quite slimy, almost mucus-like. Small flying insects trapped onto that leaf surface. There you go, just like that. Those little dewdrops there will trap the insect, and then enzymes will be released, which then break down the body of the insect. Interestingly enough, a closely related plant to the sundews is probably the most charismatic carnivorous plant. I would say arguably the most famous, if you will. It's the Venus flytrap. This one, however, only occurs in a very small geographic region. This one is from our very own United States. It grows within 75 miles of Wilmington, South Carolina, so a very small geographic distribution. I actually have 3 different ones here. It's naturally found only in that area, but people around the world have been trying to grow this and breed it. Typically, you'll find a little bit of red coloration on the inside of these modified leaves. Of course, collectors and plant enthusiasts being what they are, I just found this one this morning in our collection, which is a beautiful maroonish red. And last but not least, I brought one of my coworkers' tropical pitcher plants. You might see here, this is another pitfall trap. These are typically found in places like the Philippines, Malaysia, Indonesia. Some of our largest carnivorous plants would be Nepenthes. Now, normally what we like to do when we have kids with us is to cut some of these open. This pitcher has been growing at a production facility since the summer. So it's been collecting insects all that time. When I cut this open just before we logged on, a moth flew out. But I was sort of interested to see, I don't know if that's going to show up on camera, but there was actually another butterfly that fortunately did not make its way out. Elizabeth, do you want me to try to trap one of these?
Let's give it a try. I'm going to share an image of what they look like close an insect in there, since it may be a little hard to pick up the trapping mechanism through the distance we're seeing it. So why don't we start with that so people know what they're seeing?
Sure, let me describe as it goes.
Absolutely. I'll show the trigger hairs first.
Okay. So you see, this is actually the inside of the Venus flytrap's leaf. Those, it looks like little spikes. They're actually soft hairs. That's what picks up the stimulation from an insect. That sends an electrical signal to the plant, which alerts it to change the shape of its cells and close. Right there on that hinge on the middle. There you see there is a fly that has been trapped. So if that is a live insect, it will continue to move around, further stimulating and producing those electrical signals. The leaf will then close tighter, which will give it more contact with the insect as well as release digestive enzymes. So if you were to make an analogy, animals, it's almost like this leaf is both the mouth as well as the stomach of the plant. I'm going to try it, even though this probably is going to pick it up, but just so you can kind of see the speed of it, just try to get a whole bunch of them. That one got my stick stuck.
Yeah, we're not able to.
You can't see that, can you?
Yeah. So why don't I ask you a few of our questions?
Sure, go ahead.
Yeah. So you mentioned electrical signals, but how do Venus flytraps know how to close?
Right. So people have been looking at this for a long time. So it's not that it has a brain to close, but what it's doing is it's responding to those trigger hairs. So if an insect were to land on it, on the inside of the leaf, those trigger hairs, if more than one is stimulated, or if one is stimulated for an extended period of time, that's when the plant knows, okay, it's probably worth closing now, versus if it were just a wind blowing across the surface of the leaf, or maybe some rain or something. And that then releases chemical signals throughout the plant, which tell it to close. Calcium is known to be important.
If can anything that they
Did you say that again, Elizabeth?
yeah, can they eat anything that they trap?
Right. So typically, if an insect lands on the Venus flytrap, or actually any of these carnivorous plants, what it's doing is it's going to digest the soft parts of that animal protein. It's mainly do trapping so that it can get nutrients, which are otherwise unavailable to it, nitrogen being the dominant force in this. So when the traps open, or like I showed you on these pictures here, what's left behind is the harder skeletal pieces of the insect.
Cool. So we're getting a question about care tips for your carnivorous plants. So I'm going to ask you the specific care tip question that we got, but then also I think probably people would be happy to hear lots of care tips. So the specific question is, can you give any tips on watering for sundews? I know they like to keep their feet wet, but I did have one that got moldy.
Right, yeah, so like a lot of carnivorous plants, they like to be kept quite wet. For the sundews, there are all different kinds of sundews. Some are tuberous, some have seasonality to them. I have some right now that are more or less dormant. The way that I grow most of that for most of the year is that I have shallow trays, which I keep with water. This is going to vary a little bit depending on what your growing environment is. For me, I have, maybe if I have a 3-inch pot, I might keep the water level, I don't know, no more than half the way up the side of the pot. We don't want the media to become anaerobic. I'm not sure where you saw the mold forming, but you don't necessarily need to keep them standing in water so long as you don't let them dry out.
So I'm going to go ahead and share the link to the USBG's page that shares information about cultivating carnivorous plants. We've got another cultivation type question in here. So if you wanted to start growing carnivorous plants, which variety would you recommend? And would you need to grow under a glass bell or in some kind of glass enclosure?
That's a good question. Yes, you definitely can grow them under a bell or in a terrarium, but most carnivorous plants are going to want high light. That's a pretty common trait among them. They're growing in environments that are both high light and high humidity or moisture. So if you're going to grow them in a terrarium, one challenge could be that if you're having condensation form over the glass, that can reduce the light to the plant. As far as easiest ones to grow, it would depend a little bit on what the inside of your house is like. You'll see Venus flytraps available for pretty cheap at big box stores, but I don't think that they are the easiest to grow, unfortunately. They tend to be the ones that are the least tolerant of low light. I would probably suggest something like the North American Sarracenia. These are long-lived. If you have a place that you could put it out on, like a balcony in the summer, you could use a really large decorative container. It would be stunning. And then in the winter, they don't need quite so much light, so you could bring that container indoors, maybe put it to the side somewhere where it would get some light, didn't need as much water or attention.
So speaking specifically about Venus flytraps, can you talk a little bit about the necessary temperature range and potential dormancy questions, especially about overwintering? And specifically, the overwintering question is for overwintering in a very cold zone, zone 4, so colder than where we are.
Okay, yeah. So these are probably in their natural range. The Venus flytraps are probably, I don't know, maybe zone 9. So they could take a freeze, but they don't want to be as cold as a zone 4. So what I am doing this time of year is that I am gradually decreasing the water that I provide to them, as well as letting them get the cold fluctuations that we have here in DC. At this point, we've only gotten down to around 40 degrees, and that's no problem for these plants. I would say that if you are in zone, so you might be like in the upper Midwest or Northeast, I'm sure you've already gotten across this time of year. So if it's been outside, this would be a good opportunity to bring it in and let it stay cool. You don't want it to get all the way up to 80 degrees and then down to 40. You want to keep it more moderate. Keep the soil media just a little bit damp. You don't want that to ever dry out. If you have ever repotted them, you'll see that Venus flytraps have a very minimal, so they really can't handle a dry situation. You'll probably notice that the leaves will start to, let me show you here if you can see this. They start to get maybe a little bit yellowed and a little bit black on the edges. Don't worry, that happens to all of them. Just try to not mess with it very much until the temperatures start to climb back up into around 40 degrees, and then you can put it back outside where it'll gradually get increased day length and warmth. Does that help?
Sounds helpful to me for sure. So let's see. Question about fertilizing your carnivorous plants. I know there's a little information in that link, but that's pretty specifically for Nepenthes. So can you talk about fertilization and what would be necessary for these North American natives?
Sure. So generally, people will tell you do not fertilize your carnivorous plants. As we talked about before, the whole reason they have this adaptation is because they're growing in environments that are nutrient poor. So generally, for cultivation, that's a good key that they don't want that in their pots. The danger is that it can burn the tips of their roots. The exception for that would be, it is widely among commercial growers, the Sarracenia, the native pitcher plants, can take a very low dose of either slow release or liquid fertilizer. I would say maybe 10 to 25% of the rate that you would put on another garden plant. I actually don't have a lot of problems with trying to feed my carnivorous plants. The environment that we have them in is that they are, for the most part, able to catch insects either in a well-aired environment in the greenhouse or in an open outdoor growing facility. So in those areas, they're naturally catching some insects to get the nutrition that they need. And they really don't need all that much insects to continue growing. So if you're really pressed for feeding them, sometimes what you can do is you could get, either you could maybe find some freshly dead beetles or ants, or if you go to a pet store, you can get wingless fruit flies or dehydrated mealworms. And for any of those, you could apply them to the leaf surface if it was a Venus flytrap, or drop them into a pitcher plant, or even just shake them right on top of a sundew. The one thing, they would get a little bit less of the nutrition because, as I mentioned, with the flytrap and the sundew, some of that digestion is stimulated by the movement of the insects. So you might want to try to like jiggle it around a little bit.
Great. So we've got a few questions in here about propagation. Can you propagate these carnivorous plants? There's a specific question about sundew, but I know that people will be interested in propagation in general.
Sure, yeah. So these are all flowering plants. So for any one of them, you could pretty easily find seed for sale, and you could germinate it, and they come up, from my experience, quite quickly if you just do like similar to the growing media that you would grow the plants in. You just surface sow it, keep it moist, and probably within a month you'll see very small plants coming up if the seed is fresh. That's a really fun way. Then you see the little mini plants come and you grow it on, and probably in 2 to 3 years you'll have a plant that's large enough to wrap. There's all different other fun ways to do it with sundews. Can do cuttings. I'm not going to be able to show you here, but you actually take a piece of the roots. Again, use the same growing media, kind of tack it onto the surface of it. Keep it moist and humid, and you'll see little plantlets growing along the roots. You can also do it from leaf pullings. So you would take the entire leaf blade, pull it down and off the plant. Again, pin it to the top of the growth media. Keep it moist, high humidity, and you will see small plantlets form.
Hey, Anna. So we are getting very close to the end. So I think we probably have time for Anna to answer one more question. I will also share our plant hotline information in the chat. So if we did not get to answer your question, or if you have further specifics, you can definitely reach out through these various contact methods to get answers from the experts here at the garden. So as we're talking about dormancy and Venus flytraps, do Venus flytrap need a dormancy period? Apparently there's some conflicting information out there on the internet. And I'm going to make this a sneaky two-part question about Venus flytrap growing. Can you recommend a type of indoor plant light if you wanted to try growing your Venus flytrap inside?
Sure. So to the first question, is dormancy required for Venus flytraps? I think like a lot of plants, particularly when they're young, you can keep pushing them and growing them through what would normally be a winter or a dormant period. But I find that it is helpful to let the plants have a little bit of a rest period. It does to be, all the way down to 38 degrees, but it seems like, particularly if you're growing this in cultivation where you might not have completely replicated the insect trapping and the pH levels and whatnot of the media, it kind of gives it a bit of a respite. The indoor light question is a really difficult one to answer. If this person has probably started to take a look at lights and been overwhelmed, I've been in the same position. And the advice that I would give would be to look at something that is labeled as full spectrum or daylight, and then keep that light as close to the plants as you can. Know that the intensity of the light diminishes exponentially the further that you are from it. So if you were just to have like a little, maybe a little terrarium or something on your bookshelf, you could find a bulb for the small lamp that could be, hanging just right up above it here. That's all I've got for the lights.
Thank you so much. I'm sure that's helpful for someone starting to navigate that information. So thank you so much, Anna, for answering our questions today. We appreciate you sharing your knowledge during this program